The first snowfall of the season came not with joy, but with silence. The kind of silence that settled deep into the bones like regret. The town of Bitter Creek lay under a thin white sheet, softening its harsh lines and hiding the dirt-stained paths carved by boots, wagon wheels, and shame. It was in this quiet, early morning stillness that Clara Wilkes stood on the edge of her father's porch, eyes locked on the pale horizon. Clara was 26, the daughter of Sheriff Amos Wilkes, a man carved out of bark and law. Most girls her age in the Dakota Territory had long been wed or buried by now. She was neither. But in the eyes of the town, she was something worse, a woman who didn't know her place. She wore her mother's old coat, patched and too loose, her dark brown hair braided into a knot that never seemed to hold. Beneath her sleeve, a scar wrapped around her wrist like a ghost that refused to leave. Some said it was from a fire. Others whispered darker things. Clara never corrected them. She helped her father run the jail, typed up his reports, and knew how to shoot straight. But she was always too much or too little for the men of Bitter Creek, too outspoken, too thoughtful, too kind to the wrong sort. And then there was the day she brought the wounded scout in from the edge of town. It was just past dusk when Clara found him. He had collapsed near the frozen stream outside of town, half covered in snow, blood soaking through his buckskin tunic. At first she thought him dead. A fox circled near, but when she moved closer, his eyes opened. Not blue, not brown, but a kind of storm gray that watched without fear. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze while she lifted him, while she tied him across her mule, while her hands trembled beneath his weight. She brought him to the edge of town, to the small barn behind the jailhouse, away from prying eyes and loud mouths. In the nights that followed, he drifted in and out of fever dreams. Clara nursed him in silence. He never offered his name, and she never asked. But one evening, after the snow had stopped falling and the silence deepened, he spoke in Lakota, then in broken English. "I do not die today." She smiled then, the first real smile in months. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The town of Dustwater had its rhythms, clanging horseshoes, polka chips, prayer bells, but to Eliza, all of it paled when he came riding in with the sunset behind him. Tamar's presence stirred a hush, not from fear, but from something quieter, respect that was cautious, brittle, but growing. He rode without boasting, without stirring dust, his silhouette noble, yet solitary. And yet when his eyes found Eliza's, his stoic mask melted for the briefest of seconds. No words passed between them at first, but words weren't needed. One evening as the sun poured molten gold across the prairie, she stepped outside her father's office with a tattered book clutched to her chest, one of the few novels in town, a faded collection of Walt Whitman's verses. She wasn't looking for poetry in the street, but she found it leaning against the post, arms crossed, watching the sky. "You come back often," she said, trying to sound indifferent. "I scout the border," Tamar replied. "The land remembers what men forget." She tilted her head. "And what does the land remember?" He pointed toward the tree line. "That it was free before fences, that it breathes even when men forget to." They stood quietly for a beat, and she held out the book. "Do you read?" He took the book gently, thumbing the pages as though they were sacred. "I listen better than I read, but I've heard this man's words before. Your country's songs are not so different from ours." Then, softly, he repeated, "I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars." Her breath caught. "You memorized Whitman?" "No," he said, his voice as low as a tide. "I memorized you reading it aloud. 2 days ago, outside the schoolhouse." Her cheeks flushed, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward, but warm. He handed back the book, fingers grazing hers. "I don't know what we're doing," she said quietly. He looked away, then back at her. "We're remembering the land in our own way." The first real trouble came on a Monday. A group of cowboys, grizzled, sour-eyed, scarred, came into town drunk from a range feud. They were loud, laughing too hard at their own jokes, spitting on the saloon floor and talking about redskins like roaches. It wasn't uncommon, and the town had learned to ignore such cruelty with the same shrug they gave the weather. But Eliza wasn't weather. When one of them shoved past her near the general store, nearly knocking her to the ground, she didn't flinch, just glared up with fire in her eyes. "Watch it." The man sneered. "Sheriff's daughter's got teeth. Thought you gals were bred to smile and curtsy." Sheriff McAllister appeared behind her like a ghost, stone-faced and calm. "Get back on your horses, boys, and ride sober next time." They left, but not without muttering something about half-breeds and teaching the town some manners. That night, Eliza sat on the porch, braiding her hair with shaky hands. Tama found her there, silent and moonlit. "They think I'm soft," he corrected. "They think you're brave. They think I'm yours." He looked at her, and something unreadable passed through his gaze. "Are you?" he asked, simply. Eliza didn't answer. Her fingers tightened in the braid. "They'll come back, with fire or lies or worse." "Let them come. I was born with wolves on my trail. I don't fear men who howl in the dark." She looked at him then, really looked at him. There was something ancient in his stillness, like a man who had learned not just to survive storms, but to sing to them. "Will you always ride away?" she asked. He reached for her hand, not her wrist, not her waist, but her hand, and held it gently between his. "No," he said, "not forever." That Saturday night, the town gathered for the midsummer social. Lanterns swayed under the cottonwoods. Fiddles and banjos laced the warm air with joy. Men wore their best vests, women their brightest smiles. But Eliza walked through the laughter like a ghost. Tama wasn't invited. He wouldn't have come even if he had been. Still, she found herself drifting to the edges of the crowd, eyes scanning the tree line like a girl looking for a shadow that meant more than all the candles. "You're staring at nothing," said Millie, her friend from the schoolhouse. "Or is that nothing a tall, dark something in buckskin?" Eliza gave her a look. "Don't start." But Millie just laughed. "You don't hide it very well, love. Half the town knows already. Then the other half's been too kind." Millie grew serious. "There's a price for loving someone the world says you shouldn't. You ready to pay it?" Eliza thought of the way Tama's eyes softened when he listened, the way he let children braid feathers into his hair, the way he stood with quiet strength, never asking her to be less fierce, only more true. "I already have," she said. Later that night, after most had left, she walked into the stillness beyond the square. A shadow moved by the tree line, and then he stepped out. "You watched," she said. He nodded. "You didn't come closer." "I didn't want to steal you." "You couldn't steal what's already yours." The words hung between them like a vow, like a whisper only the stars would repeat.
And then he held out his hand. She stepped into it, and though no one played music and no feet moved in rhythm, they danced there in the dark, beneath the cottonwoods and the judgment of no one but the wind.
The nights in Elkhorn Ridge were beginning to burn a little colder, but it wasn't the wind that made Josie's hands tremble when she touched the folded piece of paper hidden in her apron. It was the note from Tahoma, delivered in silence, tucked under a basket of firewood left at the back porch. Just 5 words: "Meet me by the canyon." She didn't tell her father. She couldn't. Not now, not with tensions running high after the missing cattle and the unease between the settlers and the Ute band nearby. Josie knew Tahoma hadn't stolen anything. He was too proud for that, too rooted in honor. But the townsfolk were already whispering, and her father, Sheriff Tate Whitley, wasn't a man to listen twice when he believed his duty called. She saddled the gray mare in silence that night and slipped out through the side gate as the town went to sleep. The moon was a pale coin caught behind wisps of cloud, just enough light to guide her along the narrow trail. She found him where he said he'd be, standing beneath the twisted juniper at the edge of Elk Creek Canyon, looking out over the vast emptiness as if listening for something only he could hear. The moment she stepped down from her horse, he turned, not startled, but with the soft acknowledgement of someone who'd felt her presence before he saw her. "You came," he said simply. Josie swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." A soft smile tugged at the edge of her mouth, even as her eyes brimmed. He reached for her hands, calloused fingers closing around hers. "They say your people took from the settlers, but I know you didn't." He nodded, jaw tense. "It wasn't us. It was a band from the north, but no one in town cares to see the difference." "My father—" "I know. He'll come for us both if he finds out." "Then why call me here?" Her voice broke on the wind. "Tahoma, it's not safe. Loving you feels like standing on thin ice with a fire beneath me." "Because," he said, stepping closer, pressing her hand against his chest, "this is the only place I remember what peace feels like."
The next day brought a storm, not of wind or rain, but of law and suspicion. Sheriff Whitley rode out at dawn with 3 deputies, claiming to investigate the recent cattle thefts. Josie watched from the kitchen window, heart hollowing in her chest. She knew what her father wouldn't say aloud. He was going to confront the Ute band with a rifle on his shoulder and a warrant in his pocket. She didn't wait. She saddled the mare again, hands shaking, and rode hard across the ridge, past the cottonwoods and into the hills. It was madness, but her feet moved faster than her thoughts. If her father caught Tahoma, if he even saw him, there'd be blood on the snow before any truth could catch up. By the time she reached the camp nestled beneath the canyon rim, the Ute families were already stirring with quiet anxiety. Mothers gathered children, young braves readied bows not for war but for defense. And in the middle of it, Tahoma stood calm as ever, his shoulders squared, but eyes scanning the horizon. "You came back," he said, brushing dust from her cheek. "He's coming," Josie panted. "My father's bringing men with rifles. They think you're behind the thefts." He looked over her shoulder, expression unreadable. "Then I must leave, not for fear, but for peace. If we run, they cannot trap us." "And if I go with you?" That caught him off guard. His gaze softened. "You'd leave your home?" She nodded, tears streaking. "Home doesn't feel like home without you in it."
Tahoma placed a hand behind her neck, forehead pressed to hers. Then we leave together. But before they could mount their horses, the sharp cry of a rifle rang out from the ridge. It all happened faster than breath. Josie turned just in time to see her father appear through the pine brush, his rifle raised, boots skidding to a halt on the frost-hardened earth. Behind him, the deputies flanked wide, forming a half-circle around the camp. "Step away from him, Josie!" Sheriff Whitley's voice boomed with the thunder of command and fear. She stood her ground, arms outstretched, body between her father and Tahoma. "No," she said, not a scream, but a cry that came from the pit of her soul. "He's not your enemy. He's hiding among those who are. You don't know what they've done. I know exactly what you're about to do. You're about to spill blood that never asked to be stained." Tahoma stepped forward slowly, arms raised in surrender, palms open. "Sheriff," he said calmly, "I do not seek war. We've done nothing wrong. If it's justice you want, let truth be your guide, not your fear." The deputies glanced toward Whitley, unsure. "Stay out of this," he snapped at them, but his hands were shaking. Josie crossed the frozen ground to him, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Pa, look at me. Look in my eyes and tell me I'm not the girl you raised to believe in kindness. Tell me you'd rather shoot peace in the heart than let your daughter love someone who's different." The rifle lowered, inch by inch. Silence fell heavy across the clearing. Even the wind seemed to pause. Tahoma stepped beside her. He didn't speak, only stood with dignity, as if offering his truth with no defense but presence. And finally, Sheriff Whitley dropped his gaze, then the rifle, and turned away. "No more of this," he muttered. "I'm going home. You do what you think is right, Josie." And with that he walked past her, past Tahoma, and disappeared into the woods, leaving the girl he loved and the man she'd chosen standing in the quiet that followed. They didn't speak for a long time, just breathed, until finally Tahoma reached for her hand. "Come with me," he whispered, "not to run, but to live."
The fire crackled low in the center of the Lakota encampment, its embers casting a soft orange light that flickered across Cale's sharp features. Clara sat just beside him, wrapped in a fur-lined blanket someone had draped over her shoulders. Around them, the tribe moved with quiet reverence, tending to their evening rituals, some mending hides, others grinding herbs, and a group of children chasing each other barefoot beneath the wide stars. It was a different world from the polished tea sets and etiquette her father had tried to instill in her, but it was a world where breath felt freer. And yet, tonight, Clara's breath caught in her throat. From the shadows beyond the circle of light emerged an elder, Wikasa Tanka, the spiritual voice of Cale's people. He wore a long robe of feathers and elk hide, his braids streaked with silver, his gaze carrying the weight of generations. He stopped in front of Clara, looking not at her but through her, as if her soul stood naked beneath the stars. "She dreams in the tongue of two fires," he said in Lakota, his voice as slow and deep as thunder rolling over prairie grass. Cale translated gently, watching Clara's face. "He says, your spirit walks between two flames. One will scorch your skin, the other your heart." Clara's fingers trembled. She looked at Cale, searching for the meaning behind the riddle. "And what does he mean to do with me?" "He asks if you will walk into the flame with open eyes," Cale said softly, "even if it burns everything you've known." Her reply came not in words, but in a steady breath. She removed the blanket from her shoulders, stood up, and faced the elder. "Tell him I've already stepped through it." Cale's eyes darkened with something between pride and fear. The old man nodded once gravely and left her with a single hawk feather, black with a white tip, a symbol of clarity found through trial. That night they did not sleep, not because of danger, but because silence had finally become sacred.
At sunrise, a rider came tearing through the brush, his horse lathered in sweat. Cale met him before he even dismounted. The scout's words were short, clipped, urgent. Cale's jaw tensed. He turned to Clara. "Your father is marching west. With 20 men. He means to bring you back. By force." Clara's heart stopped. "He knows I'm here?" Cale nodded. "Someone from the town must have followed us, or saw where I went after the fire." She clenched her fists, eyes wide. "We have to stop him before there's blood." Cale stepped forward, lowering his voice. "If we meet him in the valley, we can keep him from reaching the camp. But Clara, this is no longer just a search for his daughter. He's coming with rifles and fear shoots before it sees." Her voice cracked. "I have to speak to him." Cale didn't argue. He only asked, "Do you trust me to keep you safe, even from him?" She met his gaze. "With my life." Moments later, Clara found herself riding again behind Cale, arms around his waist, heart pounding as fast as the hooves beneath her. They raced across the open prairie like a shadow fleeing the morning. Wind tangled her hair, stung her eyes. But nothing stung more than the thought of her father lifting a weapon against a people who had shown her nothing but kindness. At the edge of the western ridge they saw them, the sheriff's men, rifles glinting under the rising sun, forming a line like steel teeth ready to bite. At their front rode Sheriff Whitmore, stiff-backed and pale-eyed, his hand resting on his revolver. Cale raised his palm and shouted in English, "We come in peace!" Clara slid down from the horse and ran ahead before anyone could stop her. "Papa!" Sheriff Whitmore froze in the saddle. Clara stood between both sides now, arms wide, wind whipping her dress. "You don't dare fire! These people saved my life. They fed me. They gave me shelter. They gave me back my strength." Her father's voice trembled, thick with confusion and old anger. "Clara, you've been gone for days. We thought... And now you're with him?" "I'm not his prisoner," she said, stepping toward him. "I'm here by choice." He stared at her, then at Cale, then back at his men, shifting uneasily. One of the deputies muttered, "Sheriff, what do we do?" The silence was broken only by the call of a hawk circling above. Sheriff Whitmore looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, hair wild, face sun-browned, eyes older than when she left, but there was strength there, and peace. "I came to bring my daughter home, but it seems she's already found one." And with that, he turned his horse. No one fired, no blood spilled. The storm passed, not with bullets, but with love. That evening, beneath the golden wash of twilight, Cale brought Clara to the edge of the river. He held something wrapped in deerskin. "I have never given this to anyone," he said, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a pendant, a stone carved with the image of an elk, threaded onto a leather cord. "This is my name, my true name. It was given to me when I made my first run alone across the mountain. It is not spoken. It is worn." Her lips parted in awe. "You would give me this?" He tied the cord gently around her neck. "Not just give it, share it. Among my people, when a warrior offers his name to someone, it is not for ownership. It is for protection, for belonging, for bond." She stared at him, tears rising. "Then I will carry your name with everything I am." And in that quiet space, as river reeds bowed in the breeze and the sky turned to amber fire, Clara Whitmore, sheriff's daughter, ceased to be only that. She became his equal, not in blood, but in choice. And that choice would shape everything that followed.
The morning after the fire, the town was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. Smoke still curled upward from the ruins of the jailhouse and the collapsed saloon, the boards scorched and brittle. Nothing moved but the ashes and the wind, and the broken sign of the general store swinging gently from one hinge. Clara stood at the edge of the wreckage in her soot-stained dress, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped her father's old hat to her chest. The sheriff had died as he'd lived, defending the law, even when the line between right and wrong had blurred. He had stepped in front of a bullet meant for her. It had been so fast she barely remembered falling to her knees beside him, the blood blooming across his chest like a poppy field under her hands. She hadn't cried, not yet. The town didn't need tears. It needed a spine. And right now, somehow, that meant her. But when Two Moons walked out of the hills, dusted in the red of battle and smoke, Clara forgot how to stand. He was alive. He had ridden all night with the others, the Lakota men who once stayed outside the town's walls, now marching in like a returning army. It was Two Moons who had led them, who had told them what the outlaws were planning, who had come back not for vengeance, but for her. Their eyes met across the silence. He paused, the wind lifting his long hair, his chest heaving beneath his worn tunic. And then, as if there was no one else in that broken town, he walked straight to her. "You stayed," she whispered. "I told you I would." And then, in front of the broken people of a broken town, he knelt, not in submission, but in honor. From the small satchel slung across his back, he took a band of hide braided with his clan's markings, worn and sacred. "In my language," he said, loud enough for those standing in the ruins to hear, "when we give our name to someone, it is not just to marry. It is to trust them with the story of our blood." He looked up at her. "You have had my name since the night we met, Clara. I just didn't know it until I almost lost you." Her breath caught. "I can never belong to this town," she said softly, "and I can never ask you to give up your world." He stood. "Then we make a new one." Somewhere behind them, a child began to cry. Somewhere else, a man coughed in the ash. But here, in this space between them, something rare was happening. Not just love, not just reconciliation, hope.
Weeks passed, and the town slowly began to rebuild. But something had changed in it, something rooted deeper than brick or wood. The lines between white and red, lawman and scout, had begun to blur. There were still whispers, of course. Old fears didn't burn away with one night's fire. But the people had seen Two Moons bleed for them, and they'd seen Clara fight beside him, not as a sheriff's daughter, not as a woman who had broken every expectation, but as someone who could lead with her heart and not her bloodline. Together, they rebuilt the schoolhouse, this time with 2 flags hanging at its doorway, one for the United States, one for the Lakota. And when Clara stood to teach again, the benches were filled with children of every color, boys with feather braids and freckles, girls who spoke English and Lakota in the same sentence. Two Moons spent his days helping replant the fields and rebuild the barns that had burned. But at dusk, he would return to the little cabin they built with their own hands at the edge of the cottonwoods, and Clara would meet him there. It wasn't always easy. The world outside their valley still clung to old divisions. But here, they had made space for something different. and on the morning the first frost painted the grass silver, Clara woke to find two moons carving something into the oak post by their door. She stepped outside, barefoot, holding her shawl tight. "What are you doing?" she asked gently. He smiled and stepped back. The Lakota symbols were simple but beautiful. "This," he said, pointing to the carving, "is your name." Clara traced the lines with her fingers. "But that's not—" "It is now," he said, and placed her hand over his heart. "You carry my name. You carry our fire." They stood there in the cold morning, not needing to say more. And when the winds came that winter, howling across the plains, people in the valley said they always saw smoke rising from that little cabin, warm, alive. And when new settlers asked who that woman was, teaching their children, riding beside the scout who knew every hidden trail, they were told, "She's the sheriff's daughter." But her heart, someone would always add, with a half-smile, "it belongs to a warrior." And in the distance, someone always saw two horses, one black, one dappled, riding together along the ridge, the wind carrying laughter and love, and the language of two worlds that had finally found peace in one name.